Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through giallo cinema is the second giallo film from Riccardo Freda, The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, released in 1971. This video is an edited down version. Herein you will find the overview portion of the full-length video. Coming next week will be the complete deep dive with the review and GialliTally. This video may be watched entirely without any spoilers. Here is The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. Overview. The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire is an Italian, French, and West German co-production. The film is directed by Riccardo Freda, billed as Willy Perito, who also co-wrote the film along with Alessandro Continenza, supposedly based on a novel by Richard Mann. Music is by Stelvio Cipriani. The cast is comprised of Luigi Pistil as Detective John Norton, Dagmar Lassander as Helen Sobieski, Anton Diffring as Ambassador Sobieski, Valentina Cortese as Mrs. Sobieski, Renato Romano as Mandel, Arthur O'Sullivan as Inspector Lawrence, Dominique Boschero as the ambassador's mistress, and Werner Pochath as Mark Sobieski. The plot takes place in Dublin in the wake of a murder of a mistress of a Swiss ambassador who is discovered in the trunk of his car. The inspector on the case has every reason to assume the ambassador is the killer, but because of diplomatic immunity, he is unable to parse through the legal red tape in order to conduct an investigation and prove his theory. Detective John Norton is then brought in to circumvent the legal barriers and find justice. Norton once had a prestigious position leading the homicide task force, but was discharged disgracefully for his propensity for violence during his interrogations, which resulted in the death of a suspect. The trail takes some wild twists and turns, and ultimately leads to himself and his family being put in the crosshairs. After Freda's 1969 proto-giallo, Double Face, he would begin to slip up and lose his way in his cinematic endeavors. His follow-up film being an Italian, West German, and Israeli co-production, La Salamandra del Deserto, that he hardly even directed, which would become a more and more common thing for the director to do, to the point that he would disown some of his later films, Iguana with the Tongue of Fire being the first one to disown. This giallo is mostly uninspired, unless you include going for a post-Argento's Bird with the Crystal Plumage styled cash grab. Freda claims he didn't complete the directing on this picture, and the pseudonym he dons for this film is one he would never use before nor after. He writes, directs, and edits the film, but quite honestly, none of these jobs he performs nearly approaches the same level he had done for Double Face or his earlier films. Being set in Ireland is an interesting choice, but Freda doesn't utilize the scenic location. Some directors overdo it. Freda leaves us wishing for more here. We have a digression in the plot to Switzerland, which just adds minutes to the running time, but hurts the pacing. Not like the pacing was good to begin with. The makeup and special effects range anywhere from unconvincing to hilariously bad, plus some directing and editing choices make for some unintentionally humorous scenes. The screenplay was said to be adapted from a Richard Mann novel called Room Without a Door, but in reality, it is very possible that this title and this person are entirely fabrications created to give the impression that this movie had more culture attached to it, for it is based on a book, don't you know? The writing, particularly in the dialogue, is atrocious and ridiculous.
I seem to suggest that it might have been a woman. Isn't it possible?
Certainly, it is possible. The use of vitriol does suggest a woman's hand, or a colored person's. They're expert at such things.
Mr. Joe, what's the problem? It's that new singer. She's dead in her dressing room.
Excuse me, I'm a doctor. Maybe I can help.
No, I think it's too late. Anyway, you better come with me.
Are we going to have it off in the bushes or on the bike?
It's damp in the bushes.
The police will never find him. Never. He's too clever. Much too clever.
But to be fair, they justify the animal title.
You know, I remember once in Brazil, I stepped on an iguana hidden among the jungle foliage. This murderer, too, is certainly living amongst us, perhaps under our very eyes. You know, the iguana is clever at disguising himself. The only difference is that the iguana, though horrible, is harmless, while our murderer is probably pleasant to look at, but he cuts throats and uses vitriol. It's his tongue of fire, you might say.
Yeah, let's say that. The ending is surely surprising and over the top in some of the most fun ways. Does it save the movie, though? I mean, I'll let you decide. Despite the directing and editing overall severely underperforming, the soundtrack is pretty good. I mean, Stelvio Cipriani is one of the great giallo composers, so at least he showed up to work. Although, some of the music was recycled from his work this same year on Bay of Blood, which would come out in the coming months. The cast is full of giallo veterans, and they're also doing pretty well. Luigi Pistil finally stars in a giallo role, and he does not disappoint. His character is in the vein of a Dirty Harry type cop, although nowhere near that caliber. But however, it seems his character is partially inspired by a real-life event. Giuseppe Pinelli was an anarchist who was detained in connection to the bombing of the Bank of Agriculture on December 12, 1969 in Piazza Fontana. 3 days later, on the 15th, Giuseppe would die by falling out of the 4th-story window of the room he was being interrogated in, taking his own life. Or so that is what the interrogating officers said, but many do believe that he was tossed through the window. Anton Diffring is well cast as the bastard ambassador. He was a German actor born in 1918 who had ironically fled the Nazis only to end up being typecast as Nazi characters over and over again in English films. He is best known by the horror community for The Man Who Could Cheat Death, 1959 by Terence Fisher, Circus of Horrors, 1960 by Sidney Hayers, and Faceless, 1988 by Jess Franco. But beyond horror films, he also worked with renowned filmmakers like François Truffaut in Fahrenheit 451, 1966, and Ken Russell in Valentino, 1977. He was also in the infamously controversial, unreleased film by Jerry Lewis, The Day the Clown Cried, 1972, a dramedy set in the Nazi death camps. In Iguana, he steals the scenes and his performance surely is memorable. He passed away in 1989. Valentina Cortese is good enough, but her role offers her little to do. Dagmar Lassander is stunning as always. Freda would make one more giallo film in 1981, Murder Obsession. Thank you for watching this overview-only video. Don't miss the full overview, review, and GialliTally for The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire next week. As of right now, the movie doesn't appear to be streaming anywhere, but you can rent it on YouTube, Google Play Movies, Apple TV, and Amazon Prime Video. Don't forget to like this video and join me next week to see the rest of this review. Comment your predictions for the AZ score for the movie and the final GialliTally score. Check out the King in Giallo Patreon. New price tiers are up. We have $3 for early access and the viewings. That is over 20 full movie viewings and early access to the YouTube content over a month before the videos go live. The $5 tier has all the Patreon exclusive content. The King in Giallo podcast, the Giallo adjacent podcast, the Rat Hole Burn movie reviews, the Giallo Reads book reviews, plus more. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
You bitch.